Governments are gangs. We get the impression that they are elected officials because they are the biggest gang, and that gives the impression of authority. The only difference is they do their crimes through paperwork instead of violence. They use violence too. This should obviously make us skeptical of anything that comes from them. Occam's razor is necessary in this world of bullshit, but we have to be careful not to slit our throats on it in the name of healthy skepticism. We should be critical of all things, especially when coming from any form of government and military. While sometimes, though, it's more appropriate to put down the weights of logic for a moment and realize that we have misconceptions. So if I was to tell you that reality is not taken in by the experiencer, but instead projected by him, or there were safe ways to open the doors to greater realities than perceivable by our own current biology, it is safe to say that a healthy dose of Occam's razor would kick in. If I was to tell you that matter in physical form does not exist, and that reality is more of a dream or a thought-formed hologram, the same skeptical response would be expected. But what do we do with Occam's razor when these things that are impossible become absolutely verifiably real and practiced and accessible to all of mankind? When we think of government and deep state organizations like the CIA, the last thing that comes to mind is anything mystical. Well, surprisingly so, metaphysics and spiritual matters are not only of interest to, but indeed a foundational cornerstone of the Central Intelligence Agency, an organization that's been up to no good ever since they assassinated John F. Kennedy. Yeah, I said it. You all know I'm going to get shot for this one, right? And if we know anything about our own governments and its branches, we know that earth-shattering scientific findings like these are not in safe hands with them. And that is exactly why everything I'm about to tell you was deeply classified. So, here's a quick timeline. In 1956, the to-be founder of the Monroe Institute, Robert Monroe, became interested in hypnopedia or sleep learning. While experimenting with different methods, he stumbled upon a state of consciousness that was not planned upon or recognizable. Although the term astral projection had not yet been coined, this is by all means exactly what he stumbled upon. And besides finding that he could remove himself from his body, navigate the room outside of his body, and in fact was able to look at his body, he also found himself coming face to face with some forms of non-human intelligence, beings the majority of which seemed to be reptilian in nature. And as strange as that is, hold on to that little piece of information as we get into the details of the research findings. This particular method of so-called sleep learning caused him to have what is known as an out-of-body experience. And what is more startling is that he could replicate the same results for others. Robert Monroe was so successful in his methodology of transferring people's consciousness from their body into the so-called astral field that by 1971, his book, Journeys Out of Body, created a movement of people actively taking advantage of this new research. Anyone familiar with this channel will not be surprised that immediately following that year, in 1972, the US military began propaganda claiming that the Soviet Union was pouring money into this pseudoscientific research. This used to be a very effective way of debunking something before it gains traction. However, now with the internet, this tactic can no longer be utilized by those who perceive themselves to be in control. And of course, in perfect fashion of our government, the very research that they were blackballing became of peak interest to them, but of course in the form of weaponization and spying. Although they failed in their attempts to weaponize this mystic science, as far as we know, the results of the extremely well-funded research came to be one of the most reality-shattering, unexpected findings of all time. They failed to weaponize it, and I wonder if their attempts of weaponizing such spiritual technology is because of this. The subject is parallel to the concepts of the Tao, Zen, and other ancient esoteric teachings of wisdom that are beyond the subjugation or abuse of ignorant man. But the ties between this science and ancient wisdom is something we can get to later. The CIA and their unlimited funding began several cryptic and classified research operations, a few of which were called MK-Ultra, Project Stargate, and of course the Gateway process. Completely ignoring the sacred body of knowledge being tapped into, the CIA began its attempts to understand and weaponize the very fabric of reality and the infinite birthless perpetuation that is consciousness. Human consciousness. Guided by the patent of Dr. Monroe, they began experiments to induce and control the pliable fabric of reality through altered states of consciousness, particularly a method coined as hemisync, which is short for brain hemispheric synchronization, I believe. And that's a concept that sure does remind me a lot of our reoccurring theme on this channel concerning the unification of opposites. The CIA appointed Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonald to bring this seemingly mystical happening into the framework of stark science. The goal was to find how quantum mechanics and theoretical physics could explain the nature and functioning of human consciousness and its abilities while untethered to the flesh. It was made pertinent to remove any stigma of cult or mystical connotations of this research. This is something that proved to be impossible, as we'll see later. The conductors of this research, including the colonel himself, became complete non-skeptic of the ancient teachings in which this science seems to derive from. Although the comprehension and understanding of this hidden part of our reality was not attained by anyone involved, considering that subjects like these are just about impossible for man's mammalian brain to grasp, there were results that are irrefutably eerie and raise more questions than answers. With Dr. Monroe's methods, the CIA was able to successfully prove the existence and in fact induce states of consciousness that transcend the limitations of space-time and the laws of physics as we know it. Subjects were successfully able to read from literature in segregated rooms by traveling their consciousness out of their physical form, therefore being able to witness and report verifiable things happening in other locations during the time of their experiment. Another downright freaky example was an experiment that linked two men to the same frequency of sound, yet separated by a great distance. They raised the frequency of the men's mental vibration by 10 hertz each, blindfolded both subjects, and put a banana into the hand of subject number one. Honestly, this is the CIA, so they probably put their in his hands, but nevertheless, when asking subject number two to imagine holding something in his hand, the first thing to pop into his head was banana. This test was repeated successfully with different objects, eliminating any statistical error of coincidence, as all of these experiments did. The list of these experiments are enough to fill an entire video. The findings were eerily reminiscent of the experiences of patients who die on the operating table and are able to describe afterwards details of the happenings around them while their body was deceased. A strange happening that occurs far more frequently than I think anyone assumes. These government-funded researchers were able to deduce that the atomic structure of matter is not solid, but in fact sort of a holographic oscillating frequency of energy. Not only did we find that matter and form does not objectively exist, but these holographic fields of energy that make up our reality are in fact a product of sentient consciousness. To put it bluntly, we are all either simultaneously dreaming reality, or we are all living within the dream of a greater being, like hinted at in Hindu mythology, that we are portions of the psyche dreamed by the Brahma. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the interpretation of these results in today's language being coined as simulation theory. The idea that our reality is information stored on a giant computer or on the surface of a black hole. But let's not pick one or the other, as we know that interpretations oftentimes are only different in language, but sprout from the same root. It's worth noting how interesting it is that mainstream scientists such as Neil deGrasse Tyson and many others gleefully accept the idea of a holographic computer-simulated universe, but will scoff at the idea of reality being a form of a dream. We are truly becoming lost in the language when it comes to these concepts. Time and time again, it comes down to it, several different mouth noises describing the same thing. There seem to be many ways to trigger these transcendental states of awareness, from hallucinogens to meditation and yoga, sound frequency manipulation, otherwise known as cymatics, to even near-death experiences and so on. But it seems as though the cheat code utilized by the CIA required an equalization of electromagnetic brain patterns between the two hemispheres of the brain. The left logical side of the brain and the right creative side of the brain are constantly playing ping pong with each other, formulating your thoughts and your habits, and thus your reality. The two hemispheres of the brain are in fact separate from each other inside of the skull, connected only by the pineal gland and pituitary gland, as there is a thin layer of cerebral spinal fluid between the left and right, encasing the brain within the skull. It seems as if when the game of ping pong between the two hemispheres of the brain ceases and comes to unification or coherence with each other, a sort of amplified consciousness takes place with many mysterious attributes and abilities. Hey, I'm reminded of "Let thine eye be single." Interesting. But to the absolute shock of the researchers, the results clearly visible on every EEG scan done produce what can only be described as portals to other dimensions. That description, much like a DMT experience, is a loose illustration at best. Each participant, despite being compartmentalized and isolated from the other participants, reported similar experiences and were successful with confirming their OBE. And when we consider the parallels between the gateway process and the esoteric philosophy, Gnostic thinking, and the idea of the Tao, or primordial first cause, being rebranded today as the unified field, it is almost as if nothing is real and we kind of all knew about it all along, but forgot. We have found that we have direct access to the energy of the unified field and the information of the Akashic records. And yet we squander this opportunity in mutual agreed upon cultural ignorances. We sacrifice this cornerstone of our collective self to the glimmers and the circus and its bread. The results of this experiment only get weirder and weirder. Much like Monroe had experienced initially, the participants in the experiment would also frequently witness intelligent, sentient beings of impossible biological nature. Many of them described as having features that of a reptile, even to the point as being described as alligator people. These isolated participants described the identical creatures that Monroe himself had encountered when he began his research alone. This caused the investigator into a 35-year obsession of trying to understand what these beings are and their origin. What the right? These occurrences were so frequent that the participants were instructed to, quote, be intellectually prepared to react to possible encounters with intelligent, non-corporeal energy forms when time-space boundaries are exceeded. These coincidences of seeing these entities of reptilian features are, of course, impossible, and forces one to speculate whether or not these beings exist objectively outside of our minds, where we can gain access to their frequency with these techniques, or, psychologically speaking, humans have a common archetypal trait within our collective consciousness that involves the personification of reptiles. I almost feel as if Jung would side with the second, but the part of me that seeks excitement likes that first option quite a bit. But speaking of which, let's divert from the experiment for a moment to mention how bizarre it is that this part of the story is never mentioned. After 35 years of God knows what kind of research, Monroe and his assistants reported the wildly speculative conclusions that I'll list here below. And this gets a little weird, and it's left out of pretty much all reported upon videos of this case, but this is what Monroe and his team reported. 1. These vile lizards have controlled and enslaved humanity for millennia. 2. They exist and operate in the 4th dimension and are only visible to those people who can see beyond our extremely limited spectrum of visible light. 3. Reptilians feed on our spiritual life force, which Monroe called loosh. The negative, low vibrational energy is essential for their survival. 4. These parasitic beings see the earth as a huge farm where they collect human fear, hatred, anxiety, and they feed on it. 5. Their intellect is equal or exceeds that of humans. 6. This elusive reptilian-like race considers itself the true and supreme ruler of humanity. Just a wild ride. And for that to be coming from the Monroe Institute adds such what the fuckery about it. And if you frequent this channel, I don't have to mention how impossibly coincidental this is to what we learned in our Saturn video concerning the Gnostic Demiurgos and its archons. I'll leave that connection and speculation entirely up to you, though. How strange is it that DMT experiences are frequently saturated in the archetype of the jester, while with Ibogaine, it specializes in contacting deceased persons, and with Amantia muscaria mushrooms, they're famous for elves. Ayahuasca has a recurring theme of serpents. It's strange how these different altercations to consciousness yield specific archetypes in both character and setting. But anyway, back to the CIA and their shenanigans. After achieving their goal, results went as far as to hone in on and fine-tune the process to make an accelerated version of the practice, similar to a ritual that can be sort of a shortcut to the otherwise 6-week process that is the Gateway process. This shortcut is buried deep within the gigantic report. I did the legwork, and I'll chat on that after some more of this mystical science shit. So they were able to successfully pierce into the unified field of which all things are birthed, the pre-creation fabric of that which reality can reside. Not reality and its attributes themselves, but that by which reality can exist. And you know this to be the unified field, or the Tao. As the Vedic saying goes, it is not what the eyes can see, but thereby which the eyes can see. Know that to be Brahma the Eternal. And not that which the ears hear, but that by which the ears can hear. Know that to be Brahma the Eternal. As successful results became easier and easier to attain, the CIA likewise became concerned about the accessibility to this hidden knowledge to undeserving, so-called, civilian folks such as ourselves. The way they decided to combat inevitable possibility, they attempted one of the most ridiculous things I've ever read into, and you just can't make this shit up. The CIA hired a military branch to develop a DMT perpetuating drip intravenous machine in order to send soldiers into the unified field, or as called in the document, the absolute, with a mission to deter civilian practitioners from gaining access to these higher realms. So the government literally hired super astral soldiers to scare away any civilian human beings from sacred, hidden, and ancient knowledge. And tell me that's not some bullshit. The egg is finite yet infinite due to its circular shape and flux. This is both parabolic and literal. Parabolic in the way that a cosmic egg is the all, and also the source of the all in an infinite cycling state of fluctuation, sentient, while the cosmic egg, is also literal in the sense that the magnetic field of Earth is toroidal, the shape of a torus, a self-repeating pattern that is both infinite and finite. The torus field occurs naturally throughout the universe on many many levels: galaxies, planets, the human heart, cells, the atomic structure, photons, and so below. And that keeps going forever. And in that case, then we are to assume up also forever. But as we have seen, infinite within a repeating pattern, a loop, so to speak. Well, in an egg. This god-awful drawing is actually very poignant, and I wish somebody out there with the graphics design skills could, I don't know, recreate this with symmetry and accuracy. That would be very cool. Hit me up if you do that. I'd love to use it for a thumbnail in the sequel to this video that will concern Ingo Swann. Looking at sections of the results of this gateway process, there's a lot of coincidences that take place with the esoteric ancient teachings. For example, section 30, which is titled Advanced Techniques, is straight up just meditation, but more scientifically worded. This document, towards the end, they tackle the idea of problem solving, utilizing access to the Akashic record, this ancient fabled library of information that stores all sentient happenings within the universe. Many skeptics of the authenticity, or of the, well, not the authenticity, but of the happenings during the gateway process will mention the placebo effect. But in that case, then what is the placebo effect? In fact, that's just as big a mystery, and indeed, just like in this case, impossibly so. If the placebo effect didn't exist objectively, and it was just rumored to be so and suppressed by our medical field and science, it would be cryptic, just like the rest of these teachings, such as meditation, yoga, and astral body experiences. Which brings me to a portion of the document that states the exercises and practices utilized in the gateway process are just, it states that these are just tools to make the out-of-body transition easier. But if honed in and perfected by the student, this state and other states like it can be achieved by sheer willpower alone. This is very akin to what might be described as a Kundalini awakening or a realization of Zen, enlightenment, if you will. The sort of life after death portion of this document seems to bring comfort to the reader, as opposed to the, I'm sure, the agenda of the Central Intelligence Agency in which was conducting this study. Came to the conclusion that there is some sort of a primordial I within that transcends death, that a personality of sorts, when death arrives, leaves the body and joins this Akashic record, this unified field of information and energy, disperses, yet takes its teachings, its learnings, and its experiences with it. Essentially, I hesitate to use the word, immortality of all human beings. Unification through death is called the return to the absolute, and it seems like a nice and warm, fuzzy concept, of which this document, being stark science, seems to take a left turn. There's something that I think is important to remember when both experimenting with the gateway process and these ancient esoteric teachings and exercises, that yes, the CIA was able to conduct these studies, fund them, and successfully reproduce results. This paints sort of a good guy type feature to this government agency. But we shouldn't be fooled. We have to remember that as being a portion of government, its idea in the first place was to create human soldiers, weapons, mindless robots intended to do the bidding of those who find themselves to be in control. I applaud the CIA for their research into these mystical states, but I mean, shame on them for both keeping it sealed and restricted from us, classified. And at the same time, shame on them for wanting to control reality against the will of the people. And that was the idea behind this entire thing in the first place. Now, let's not get confused. Monroe meant well, and his team sought to understand a deeper sense of reality about the universe. But when the CIA got a hold of his research and found him to be credible, they, by all means, intended to use these findings against us. It makes me wonder if maybe they weren't just out to weaponize this, but also, in a way, hoping to harness our attention in such a way that they could better control society. I can't help but speculate about the intentions of the CIA and the intentions of the so-called archons of the Gnostic Demiurgos, the Sophia. These so-called reptilian creatures that reoccur in all of these astral projections that were conducted and studied upon by multiple different sources and multiple different people. It almost seems as if the CIA wants to better understand consciousness and suffering in order to appease a sort of an otherworldly parasitic existence that by all means maybe is best described as a reptilian. I'm trying real hard, guys, not to do an entire video on reptilians just because of how quickly I could be, frowned upon. I don't want to be compared to flat earthers or any other very hokey conspiracy theorists, but man, I'll tell you what, as much as it comes up throughout the researchings of these videos, it's very hard to ignore. Amongst Ingo Swann's lost work, he wrote in Beyond the God's Devices, if humanity were suddenly to become honest with itself, it would have to admit that it has not been very noble, certainly not rational, and that the course of destiny of humankind has never been ruled by reason for longer than 2 minutes at a time. These are unpopular words, but if we look around us at a world now in planetary contract as a whole, we can easily see that humankind is a mess, that the ideas about ourselves are gobbledygook, and that's a silly word, and that most of us are at one level or another suffering tremendously as a result. Liberation means getting free of something. In the psychic sense, obviously, it means getting free of some psychic situation or condition in which one is stuck or trapped. When liberation is about to occur or is imminent but has not yet actually taken place, this psychic situation or condition is felt or sensed as a prison. The walls, bars, and chains of a psychic prison are always built out of the veils of lies that the humanoid intellect erroneously assumes to be truth. There are two kinds of psychic lies: those that are created within the psychic systems of the individual and self-imposed by him or her, and those that are created outside the individual and imposed from outside upon the individual. Psychic prisons generally are occult. Don't let this word throw you. It simply means hidden. All lies constitute fake or pseudo-realities. All truths constitute real realities. Fake realities can only be generated or created in one place: the humanoid intellect. Nothing else in the cosmos bothers to create fake realities. The inability to discern between fake and real realities is actually what creates the psychic prison. A fake reality seen through instantly ceases to be a prison, and a sense of liberation results. There are lesser and greater liberations depending on the magnitude of the lie seen through. In the enlightening Brahmanical psychological philosophy of India's ancient peoples, the Sanskrit term for illusion was Maya. Unfortunately, early Western translators of this word mistranslated it, and this mistranslation has been perpetuated. The familiar illustrations in the Vedanta texts regarding the definition of Maya are quite clear and explicit, so clear that it is unclear why Westerners should mistranslate it. In the psychic wreckage of our present Western culture, Maya has been reduced to a complex term, meaning that all of our ideas derived either from inner perceptions or impressions of what is exterior, or Maya. Hence, to the Westerner, Maya means that all is illusion. Doubtless, this mistranslation was envisaged, created, and perpetuated by certain intellectuals who already viewed all as illusion. And if one seeks to study the rest of ancient India through this one lie, all ancient Indian philosophy will be unintelligible. This has not stopped the lie makers and several all-is-illusion sects presently busy ramping through our psychically wrecked culture with great aplomb, like voracious rats in a garbage heap. Maya means that a thing seen does not exist, but that we are blinded and our minds perverted by our own thoughts, and as a result do not arrive at the real interpretation and meaning of the word or of the universe around it. We are restricted and limited to our Maianic misperceptions, hence the prison. This psychological action is what creates psychological prisons. In the next to worst possible case, the prison can be so intense that everything begins to look like our worst fears. By far, the worst case, though, is when the illusion is defended as a truth and is used as a justification to attack. In our present psychically wrecked culture, truth-finding is a difficult, risky, if not awesome task, riddled with dangers. Many people just give up with a sigh and say, who knows what to believe anymore? And come on now, the future will certainly dump on you if you occupy that attitude for very long. So without further adage, let's get into this so-called shortcut that the gateway process boasts of. As written in the document, and I quote, A. Begin by using the Gateway hemisync tapes to achieve enhanced brain focus and to induce hemisphere synchronization. B. Add strong REM sleep frequencies to induce left brain quiescence and deep physical relaxation. C. Provide hypnotic suggestion designed to enable an individual to induce deep auto-hypnotic state at will. D. Use auto-hypnotic suggestion to attain much enhanced focus of concentration and motivation in rapidly progressing through Focus 12 exercises. E. Then repeat steps A and B following the use of the auto-hypnotic suggestion that an out-of-body movement will occur and be remembered. F. Repeat step E to achieve faculty in gaining out-of-body state under conscious control. Alter hypnotic suggestion to stress ability to consciously control out-of-body movement and maintain it even after REM sleep state ends. And finally, G. Approach Focus 15 and 21 objectives to escape from the time, space, and interact. Unfortunately, this is where the documentation